Why didn't he just say he doesn't like my burgers? I will punch you in the face!
There is one specific type of actor that the modern Hollywood machine simply cannot manufacture, no matter how many millions they throw at the problem.
I'm here for you!
You can build a movie star in a lab, give them the right chin, a world-class personal trainer, and a 10-picture deal, but you cannot manufacture instinct.
Wow, I actually appreciate that.
Real, raw comedic instinct isn't born in a rehearsal room or a pampered trailer. It's forged in the trenches of stand-up and sketch comedy.
What?
Think about it. On a film set, you've got editors, reshoots, and 20 takes to find the funny.
Man, this movie's gonna make House Party look like House Party 2 or House Party 3. Shut the f*** up. Yes.
But in front of a live audience, there is no safety net. If you aren't funny, the room turns into a vacuum of silence so uncomfortable it would make a black hole look welcoming. That environment, that brutal, unforgiving feedback loop is where the real titans are created.
A woman would never make a nuclear weapon. They would never make a bomb that kills you. They'd make a bomb that makes you feel bad for a while.
It produces performers who can control a room with a single look and improvise their way through a narrative disaster without breaking a sweat. Today, I want to take a deep dive look at 5 individuals who took that frantic, chaotic energy of the stage and used it to fundamentally change the landscape of cinema forever. They are the individuals who redefined what a leading man could be and proved that comedy isn't just a side quest to serious acting. And stick around, because one of them started as a street performer in San Francisco and became so influential that a young Jim Carrey literally copied his mannerisms just to figure out how to exist. He is the blueprint for everyone on this list, and he deserves a conversation entirely of his own at the very end. So let's revisit the legends who turned the comedy stage into a Hollywood empire.
Sometimes you work with some real jerks. Yeah. And if there's a sequel, well, you're kind of stuck with them.
First, let's talk about the man who is essentially a human cartoon brought to life by a cosmic accident. If you want to see a perfect example of a massive institution completely fumbling the bag, you have to look at the relationship between Saturday Night Live and Jim Carrey. Seriously, I want you to go and watch this right now if you haven't seen it. His 1980 audition for SNL, it's on the internet, and it is a fascinating raw piece of footage. You've got an 18-year-old kid, barely an adult, standing on that legendary stage performing a post-apocalyptic Elvis and a Henry Fonda impression that is so technically precise it's almost unsettling. It's unpolished, sure. He's a bit frantic, his energy is dialed up to about 14, but you can see it. You can see the lightning in the bottle. And what did NBC do? They said, nah, we're good. They rejected him, and then they rejected him again. And then, and this is my personal favorite piece of Hollywood idiocy, they rejected him a third time because an assistant decided that Lorne Michaels wouldn't like his material, so it never even reached the man's desk. Think about that for a second. Some gatekeeper making $10 an hour decided the world didn't need to see the greatest physical comedian of a generation because they were having a bad Tuesday. It's a stark reminder that success in this industry isn't some logical merit-based ladder. It's a chaotic mess of timing and surviving the opinions of people who wouldn't know talent if it hit them with a folding chair. But being rejected by SNL was probably the best thing that ever happened to Jim Carrey. Instead of being stifled by the rigid, often hit or miss structure of 30 Rockefeller Plaza, he found himself in the trenches of In Living Color. Now, if you haven't revisited In Living Color lately, do yourself a favor. This was his real training ground. He was the token white guy in an ensemble dominated by the Wayans brothers, who are a comedy dynasty of their own. He wasn't just handed sketches, he had to fight for them. He had to compete with Damon Wayans and David Alan Grier every single week. That environment forced him to refine his physical comedy to a point that is quite frankly impossible for a normal human being to replicate. Carrey's face has more movable parts than a Swiss watch that's been dropped in a blender.
I prefer mine in concentrated form.
And then we get to 1994. I don't think people truly grasp the absolute madness of Jim Carrey's 1994. In the span of 12 months, he released Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. It's not a regular good year. It is the single greatest breakout year in the history of comedy cinema. It's the equivalent of a rookie walking onto the pitch and scoring a hat trick in the World Cup final, then doing it again in the next 2 games. Take Ace Ventura. It's a film about a guy who finds lost dogs while wearing a Hawaiian shirt and talking out of his backside.
Excuse me,
I'd like to ask you a few questions.
If anyone else plays that role, it's a straight-to-video bin filler that you find in a petrol station for £2. But Carrey turned into a cultural phenomenon. He took a character that should have been unbearable and made him iconic through sheer unadulterated commitment to the bit. Then came The Mask. This was the perfect marriage of technology and talent. We're talking early 90s digital effects, which, as we know, can often look like a muddy mess, but it didn't matter because Carrey was doing 90% of the work with his own muscles. The animators were basically just trying to keep up with what he was doing on set. And finally, Dumb and Dumber. This is the gold standard of the idiot subgenre. The chemistry between him and Jeff Daniels, a serious dramatic actor who decided to just throw caution to the wind, is flawless. It's a movie that relies on the spark of madness I mentioned earlier, a film that shouldn't work, yet I've watched it 50 times and I still laugh at the most annoying sound in the world like it's the first time I've heard it. But here's where the story gets really interesting, because most people would have been happy to just ride that wave of goofy comedy forever. They would have made an Ace Ventura 7, the geriatric years, and cashed in those checks, but Jim Carrey had other plans. He decided to pivot, enter The Truman Show. That's when the world realized that the guy who talked with his gluteus maximus actually had the soul of a poet. It's a haunting, prophetic film about the voyeuristic nature of media, and Carrey's performance is nothing short of masterful. He managed to dial back the rubber face just enough to show the quiet, desperate humanity underneath. He followed that up with Man on the Moon, where he seemingly allowed Andy Kaufman's ghost to take up residence in his nervous system. It was a performance so immersive that it bordered on a mental health crisis for everyone else on set. Netflix released a documentary about those days the movie was filmed, and it is a very unusual experience to watch. And then of course we have Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. If you want to see Jim Carrey at his most vulnerable, this is it. He plays Joel Barish as a quiet, broken, introverted man, the complete opposite of the high energy firecracker we knew. It's a heartbreaking film, and it proved once and for all that he was one of the most capable actors of his generation, period. And yet, the Academy. I've spoken before about how the Academy Awards have a weird elitist bias against comedy, but the treatment of Jim Carrey is one of their most ridiculous omissions. He won 2 Golden Globes for his dramatic turns, yet he never even received a single Oscar nomination. Not one. It's as if the Academy saw him crawling out of a mechanical rhino in Ace Ventura 2 and decided, nope, we can never take this man seriously, even if he delivers a masterpiece. It's an absolute travesty of justice in the filmmaking world. They'll give an Oscar to a movie about a depressed mime in a basement, but they won't recognize a performer who fundamentally changed the way we perceive human emotion on screen. The weight of being the funniest man in the world clearly took its toll though. You can see in his later interviews, the guy started looking at the world through a different lens. He became more philosophical, more detached from the Hollywood machine. And that takes us to 2022 when he announced his retirement from acting. He basically said, I've done enough, I am enough. And what can I say? Good for him. In an industry where people cling to the spotlight until it's literally dragging them into the grave, there is something incredibly dignified about Jim Carrey walking away while he's still got that spark. He didn't want to become a parody of himself. He didn't want to be the guy doing the mask at fan conventions for the rest of his life. And it is funny in some way that the only movies he appeared in since then were the Sonic the Hedgehog adaptations, where he brilliantly played Dr. Robotnik. He is a man who proved that you can start by being rejected by the tastemakers of the industry and end up becoming so influential that you make the industry revolve around you. He showed us that physical comedy is a legitimate, difficult craft that requires the precision of a surgeon. Jim Carrey took the no from SNL and turned it into a yes from the entire world. But he wasn't the only one who had to fight against the perception of being just a funny guy, because that brings us to a man who is arguably the most misunderstood figure in Hollywood. A guy who is either your favorite actor or the person you love to hate, with absolutely no middle ground.
Stop, what are you doing?
Adam Sandler is without a single doubt one of the most polarizing comedy stars in the history of his generation. To some, he is the king of the lowbrow, the man responsible for a decade of cinematic vacations disguised as movies. To others, he is a misunderstood genius who possesses a raw, visceral acting ability that most serious performers would sell their souls to acquire. But to understand the paradox of Adam Sandler, you have to look past the oversized basketball shorts and the man-child voice and look at the deep-seated insecurity that drives the man. And here is the Sandler on Conan O'Brien's podcast. Conan O'Brien needs a friend. He's talking about his early days, his first appearance on late night, and he admits, with a level of sincerity that is almost uncomfortable, that he always lived in a constant fear that the audience would figure him out. He genuinely believed that at any moment the world would realize he was just a kid from Brooklyn with no business being on a stage, and they'd usher him out the door. This isn't that fake PR-friendly humility that actors use to sound relatable during an Oscar campaign. This is genuine bone-deep insecurity from a man who has made billions of dollars and still, on some level, feels like an imposter. And that right there is the secret sauce of Adam Sandler. Every character he plays, even the most absurd ones, is infused with this frantic, desperate need to be liked, or a volcanic explosion of rage when he isn't. Sandler's journey really kicks off in 1990 when he joined Saturday Night Live. Now, unlike Carrey, who SNL fumbled 3 times, Sandler actually made it into the building. But he wasn't your traditional sketch player. He didn't have the chameleonic range of a Phil Hartman or the leading man vibes of a Dana Carvey. Sandler was the song guy. He was the opera man. He realized very early on that he could use music as a bridge to the audience's heart. Take the Thanksgiving song or the Chinooka song. On the surface, they're just silly rhyming lists, but there's a craft to them. A rhythm and a specific type of observational humor, a secret handshake with the viewer. He was blending comedy and music in a way that felt effortless, but it was actually a very smart way to carve out a niche in a cast full of heavy hitters.
You're way better than the World Trade Center bomb.
But then 1995 happened. In another classic move of institutional brilliance, NBC decided to fire Adam Sandler, and they didn't just fire him, they fired him alongside Chris Farley. Imagine being the executive who looked at Adam Sandler and Chris Farley, 2 of the biggest cultural icons of the 90s, and thought, yeah, these guys are past their expiry date. Let's let them go. It's a level of professional foresight that is genuinely impressive in its sheer incompetence. But just like Carrey, getting the boot from SNL was the catalyst for the golden era. Between 1995 and 1998, Sandler went on a run that defined a generation's sense of humor. We're talking Billy Madison, Happy Gilmore, and The Wedding Singer. Now, if you were a film critic in the mid-90s, you hated these movies. You probably wrote long, pretentious columns about the death of cinema and how Sandler was a sign of the apocalypse. But the critics didn't matter because the audiences, the people actually putting their hands in their pockets and buying tickets, felt a connection to this guy that was unbreakable. Billy Madison is a gem of an infant rage comedy. It's a film about a grown man going back to primary school, and it shouldn't work. It's stupid, loud, and often nonsensical. But Sandler's commitment to being a complete moron is so pure that you can't help but be swept up in it. Then came Happy Gilmore. This is probably the holy grail of the Sandlerverse. It took the rigid, elitist world of professional golf and hit it over the head with a hockey stick. The Bob Barker fight alone is more iconic than 90% of the movies that won Oscars in the 90s. It's a film that perfectly balanced Sandler's weird, whispering sweetness with his sudden, violent outbursts of anger. It's the Sandler formula perfected.
64 more days till next year's hockey tryouts. I gotta toughen up. Yeah!
And then The Wedding Singer showed us something else. He could be a romantic lead. The chemistry between him and Drew Barrymore is one of those rare pairings. It showed that he was a guy who could make you feel something, not only screaming to penguins. But as the 2000s rolled on, something changed. Sandler entered his comfort zone period. This is the era that critics point to when they want to tear him down. The Grown Ups movies, Jack and Jill, The Ridiculous Six. This is when the narrative formed that Sandler had checked out. The common joke was that he only made movies so he could get a studio to pay for a vacation for him and all his mates. And looking at some of those films, it's hard to argue. They often feel like home movies with a studio level budget, they're lazy, and they're formulaic. But even in his most vacation mode movies, the box office numbers didn't lie. People still showed up. And why is that? Because Sandler had built a brand based on loyalty. If you liked the guy in 1996, you were going to stick with him in 2012. Even if he was playing his own twin sister in a movie that featured a Dunkin' Donuts commercial as a literal plot point. However, just when the elitists were ready to write him off as a relic of the past, Sandler decided to remind everyone that he's actually one of the most talented actors on the planet. He'd shown flashes of it before. Punch Drunk Love with Paul Thomas Anderson was a revelation. It took that Sandler rage and recontextualized it as a deeply sad psychological trauma that still managed to stay funny at certain points. It was brilliant, but people treated it as an outlier. Then came Reign Over Me, where he played a man who lost his family on 9/11. Again, a powerful beautiful, understated performance that most people ignored because it didn't involve a talking goat. But then, Uncut Gems happened. If you want to experience 2 hours of pure, unadulterated anxiety, watch Uncut Gems. It's a movie that feels like a panic attack caught on film. And at the center of it is Adam Sandler as Howard Ratner, a fast-talking, gambling-addicted jeweler in New York who is perpetually one bad decision away from total annihilation. This performance is a miracle. It is a high-wire act with no safety net. Howard is a terrible person. He's selfish, he's a liar, and he's an addict. Yet, because it's Adam Sandler, you are rooting for him. You are right there with him, sweating in that jewelry store, hoping that parlay hits. It is a visceral, haunting, and incredibly complex piece of acting. Finally, it was the moment where critics had to put down their pens and admit, okay, fine, the guy can actually act. He might even be one of the best. And what happened? The Academy Awards again. Just like Jim Carrey, Adam Sandler was completely snubbed. Not even a nomination. Not a single nod from the people who claim to celebrate the best in the industry. It was an absolute travesty. They'll nominate a guy for playing a stoic historical figure who stares at a wall for 3 hours, but they won't recognize a performer who managed to keep an entire audience on the verge of a heart attack for a full 2 hours. Sandler even joked about it, saying if he didn't win, he'd go back and make a movie that was so bad on purpose just to punish us, and honestly, we would have deserved it. But that brings us to the conclusion of the Adam Sandler story, and it's one that I find strangely moving. Sandler could have become a prestige actor after Uncut Gems. He could have worked with every visionary director in Hollywood. He could have chased the Oscar until he finally caught it. He has the talent, he has the money, and he has the respect of his peers, but instead, he went back to Netflix. He signed a massive $250 million deal to keep making movies with his friends. He chose the comfort of his inner circle over the validation of the Hollywood elite. He chose to keep making vacation movies like Murder Mystery because at the end of the day, Adam Sandler doesn't care about what the critics think. He cares about his people. He cares about the guys he's been working with since the SNL days. There is a lesson here. We live in a world that tells us we always have to be more. We always have to be better. We have to chase the highest form of validation. But Adam Sandler looked at that and said, nah, I'm good. I'm gonna go play basketball in a park, wear a hoodie that's 4 sizes too big, and make $100 million with my best friends. And honestly, it's hard to hate that. In fact, it's actually impossible not to respect it. He didn't abandon his spark of madness, he just decided to use it to fund a very comfortable life for himself and everyone he cares about. Adam Sandler is the man who proved that you can be the most underrated actor in the world and the biggest movie star at the same time. He showed us that you don't need an Oscar to have a legacy. You just need an audience that is willing to follow you anywhere, even to a luxury resort in Hawaii for a movie that doesn't have a finished script. But if Sandler is the guy who chose comfort, the next man on our list is the one who chose absolute, uncompromising chaos.
My name is Craig. I did drugs once. I am a Spartan. So check me out.
Will Ferrell is a fascinating case study in Hollywood history because I don't think people truly realize the magnitude of what he achieved. He literally invented a brand new archetype of comedic leading man that simply did not exist before he stepped onto the screen. We take it for granted now because we've seen 1,000 imitators, but before Will Ferrell, the confident man-child wasn't a legitimate cinematic pillar. Now, when you look at Ferrell's rise, you have to start with Saturday Night Live again. He joined the cast in 1995, ironically the exact same year Adam Sandler was shown the door. It was a massive transition period for the show, and Ferrell became a part of that new era. But here is the thing, he didn't become a star because he was the most talented impressionist or the best writer in the room. He became a star because he understood a very specific, very dangerous comedic formula. Absolute sincerity inside absolute absurdity.
I almost said we relaxed the office dress code to allow showings of patriotism.
Most comedians wink at the audience. They let you know that they know they're being funny. They give you that tiny subtle look that says, look at me, I'm playing a wacky character. Will Ferrell never ever winks. When he is playing a character, he is that person with a level of conviction that borders on a psychological disorder. If he's playing a guy who thinks he's a dog, he isn't a comedian doing a bit. He is a man who is fundamentally convinced he is a golden retriever, and he will bark at you until you feel uncomfortable. The perfect example of this is his George W. Bush impression. Now, we've seen a million political parodies, but Ferrell's Bush was different. He didn't play him as a villain or a malicious mastermind. He played played him as a man with absolute unwavering confidence who was simultaneously deeply confused by the world around him. He gave Bush this quality of a child trying to explain a complex math problem with a huge smile on his face. And because Ferrell never broke character, because he never played for the claps, it became one of the most iconic and influential performances in the show's history. He proved that the funniest characters are more than jokes. It's a person who is completely wrong about a situation, but has 100% confidence in their own rightness. And then he took that spark of madness to the big screen. His breakout as a leading man came with Elf in 2003. Now, I want you to think about the pitch for Elf. It's a movie about a 6'3" man in green tights who thinks he's a Christmas elf and goes to New York to find his dad. It sounds like a career-ending disaster, that kind of over-processed seasonal trash that studios churn out to just fill a gap in the December calendar. If anyone else plays Buddy the Elf, that movie is unwatchable. But Ferrell played it with such pure, unadulterated sincerity that he turned it into a modern masterpiece. He played Buddy as a creature of pure joy and zero cynicism. When he screams Santa in that department store, it is the sound of a soul experiencing genuine religious ecstasy. That is the Ferrell magic. He forces the world to bend to his absurdity because he refuses to acknowledge that he's the weird one. Then a year later, we got the big bang of modern comedy, Anchorman, The Legend of Ron Burgundy. It is almost impossible to overstate the cultural impact of Anchorman. It is one of the most quotable films in the history of the medium. But what's fascinating is that when it first came out, it wasn't some world-shattering box office behemoth. It did okay, sure, but it wasn't a phenomenon. It became a legend on DVD. It was the movie that people watched over and over again until the dialogue became a second language for an entire generation. I still quote this movie every single day. Ron Burgundy is the ultimate Ferrell creation. He is a man with zero self-awareness, an inflated sense of importance, and a brain that is essentially a hollow cave with an echo. But again, Ferrell plays him with such gravity. He treats the news of 1970s San Diego as if it's the most important thing in human history. The glass case of emotion scene is a masterclass in committed performance. He's wailing, he's pathetic, he's covered in condiment stains, but he's doing it with the intensity of a King Lear soliloquy.
You're a real hooker, and I'm gonna slap you in public.
Ferrell continued this run with Talladega Nights and Step Brothers, essentially solidifying his holy trinity of comedy. These films are monuments to the power of improvisation and philosophy of comedy. In Step Brothers, he and John C. Reilly created a dynamic that felt like a documentary of two actual middle-aged men with the mental capacity of 8-year-olds. It shouldn't be as funny as it is, but their refusal to break, their refusal to apologize for the nonsense they are putting on screen is what makes it real art. But then, just like Jim Carrey and Adam Sandler, Ferrell decided to show us the range behind the yelling. In 2006, he starred in Stranger Than Fiction. If you haven't seen this movie, please put it on your list. It's a quiet, philosophical, almost Nolan-esque fantasy drama about a man who starts hearing a narrator's voice in his head telling him that he's going to die. It is an incredibly understated, precise performance. Ferrell plays Harold Crick with a level of restraint that was shocking to audiences who only knew him as the guy who runs around in his underwear in Old School. It proved that he was a technician. He understood rhythm, he understood pathos, and he understood how to use his large physical presence to convey a deep sense of loneliness and order. It is one of the most underrated dramatic turns by a comedian in history, and once again, stop me if you've heard this before, it never became a serious award season contender. However, as we moved into the 2010s and beyond, the Ferrell formula started to encounter some resistance. We entered a period of comedy where the man-child archetype started to feel a bit stale. Films like Get Hard or Holmes and Watson felt like they were trying to capture the old magic but lacked the sharp satirical edge of his earlier work. It was like the industry was trying to turn Will Ferrell into a brand rather than a performer. The writing became lazier, the situations became more contrived, and the spark of madness felt like it was being dimmed by a studio-mandated checklist. And in recent years, we've seen Ferrell step away from those major front and center leading roles. He's doing more producing, he's taking smaller, more interesting parts in shows like The Shrink Next Door, and he's clearly being more selective with his time, and I think comedy films are worse off because of it. We live in a cinematic landscape where comedy has been largely relegated to the quippy dialogue of superhero movies. We don't really get those big swing for the fences character-driven comedies anymore. The theatrical comedy is a dying breed, and part of the reason is that we don't have performers like Will Ferrell leading the charge with that level of uncompromising commitment to the bit. Ferrell was a man who understood that comedy needs to be dangerous, it needs to be uncomfortable, it needs to be willing to look stupid for 5 minutes straight just to get one perfect laugh. He created a way of existing on screen that challenged our perception of normal. He took the insecurities of masculinity and the absurdity of the leading man and turned them into a playground of high-level nonsense. Will Ferrell is the man who proved that if you are sincere enough about your madness, the rest of the world will eventually stop laughing at you and start laughing with you. He showed us that there is a specific type of power in being a fool, provided you are the most confident fool in the room. But while Ferrell was reinventing the leading man, there was another individual on the comedy circuit who was doing something entirely different.
What my father used to say, you can't beat white people. You can only knock them out.
If the men we've discussed so far, Carrey, Sandler, Ferrell, used the comedy stage as a launchpad to escape into the stratosphere of Hollywood, Chris Rock is the guy who looked at the moon and decided he'd rather stay on the launchpad because the acoustics were better. There is a fundamental difference between Chris Rock and almost every other titan of comedy. For most, the goal is to get away from the clubs. You do the open mics to get the sketch show, you do the sketch show to get the sitcom, and you do the sitcom to get the 3-picture deal with a studio that has a logo involving a mountain or a shield. Movies are the end game. But for Chris Rock, movies have always felt like a side quest, a temporary distraction, a way to pay for the house while he waits for his next hour of material to ferment. He is the only one on this list who truly fundamentally refused to let Hollywood replace the stage. To understand why, we have to go back to the early 90s. Specifically, we have to look at his tenure on Saturday Night Live. Rock was there from 1990 to 1993, part of a legendary era that included Sandler, Farley, and Spade. But while those guys were carving out their niches with high concept characters and goofy songs, Rock was, well, he was struggling. He has been incredibly open about this in the years since, admitting that he felt underused, undervalued, and frankly, a bit lost in the shuffle. The problem was that the SNL assembly line wasn't built for Chris Rock. SNL is a show about characters, wigs, and silly voices.
I don't understand why people just won't leave me alone.
Michael, stop crying. Stop crying! Stop crying!
Chris Rock isn't a character guy. He doesn't do a wacky neighbor or a confused detective. Chris Rock does Chris Rock. He is a performer of ideas, not impressions. He is a rhythmic, high-precision orator who needs the freedom to explore a concept for 10 minutes. Not a 3-minute sketch where the punchline is that he's wearing a funny hat. Watching him on SNL was like watching a Formula One engine being used to power a lawnmower. It works, sure, but everyone involved knows it's a waste of horsepower. He left SNL in 1993, and for a minute, the industry gatekeepers probably thought he was done. They probably looked at him as another SNL cast-off who would end up doing guest spots on mid-tier sitcoms for the rest of his life. But Rock took that frustration and he poured it into the only place where he had total, unmitigated control, the stand-up stage. And in 1996, he released Bring the Pain. If you haven't seen Bring the Pain, you are missing one of the most important cultural documents of the 90s. This wasn't just a funny special. This was a declaration of war. After 3 years of being the guy in the back of the sketch, Rock stepped onto the stage at the Tacoma Theater in Washington, D.C. and proceeded to fundamentally change the rhythm of stand-up comedy. There was no physical comedy here. No rubber face like Jim Carrey, no songs like Adam Sandler, no absurdist screaming like Will Ferrell. It was just precision, rhythm. A man with a microphone who had figured out exactly how to weaponize the English language. He paced that stage like a tiger in a cage, his voice cracking with a specific type of observational fury. He took complex, uncomfortable social issues and broke them down with the surgical accuracy of a master philosopher. It was the moment he became an A-list star without any movie just because of his words.
Yo, women are just like the police. They can have all the evidence in the world, but they want the confession.
Suddenly, Hollywood came knocking again, but they still didn't know what to do with him. One of the rare exceptions to this was Dogma, Kevin Smith's bizarre, sacrilegious fever dream from 1999. And it works precisely because the movie understands what Chris Rock actually is. He isn't playing a conventional leading man or a sanitized studio comedy sidekick. He's playing Rufus, the forgotten 13th apostle, delivering existential monologues about religion and racism with the energy of a man arguing outside a bar at 2 a.m. It's chaotic, weird, deeply specific, and Rock absolutely thrives in it because Dogma doesn't try to smooth out his edges or dilute his voice for mass appeal. It just points a camera at Chris Rock being intellectually aggressive for 2 hours and lets the madness unfold naturally. Chris Rock's film career is an interesting, often baffling mixed bag. He's had hits, sure, Lethal Weapon 4, the Madagascar films, Grown Ups, but when you look at his leading roles in movies like Down to Earth or Head of State, you see the struggle. The Hollywood machine keeps trying to turn him into a traditional movie star, cinema. They wanted him to be the fast-talking hero or the lovable loser, but the magic of Chris Rock doesn't translate to a script written by 4 different people in a boardroom. The reason Rock was never truly a top-tier solo movie star in the vein of a Steve Martin or even an Adam Sandler is quite simply because he's too smart for most scripts. His comedy is built on nuance and razor-sharp social commentary, mostly assembly line cinema. The kind of stuff that gets greenlit for $300 million is built on being as broad and inoffensive as possible. You can't be the observational assassin in a movie that's designed to be sold alongside a plastic toy in a meal box. It's a conflict of interest. Every time Rock tried to play someone else on screen, it felt like he was holding back. It felt like he was muting the very thing that made him special. The only time he really shines on film is when he's directing himself, as he did in Top 5. In that movie, he played a version of himself and suddenly the rhythm was back. The honesty was back. It was the first time we saw a Chris Rock movie that actually felt like Chris Rock. But even then, you could tell he was just waiting for the press tour to be over so he could get back to the comedy cellar. For Rock, the stage is the only place where the spark of madness can truly breathe. In a movie, you're a pawn on a board. You're waiting for the lighting to be right. You're waiting for the co-star to remember their lines. You're waiting for the editor to decide if your best joke actually makes it to the final cut. On stage, it's just you and the audience. It's jazz, it's survival, it's an immediate visceral feedback loop that cannot be faked or fixed in post. And that takes us to the 2022 Oscars. Look, we don't need to recount the details. Everyone on the planet has seen the clip. It was the slap heard around the world. But what's interesting for our conversation isn't the drama itself, it's Rock's reaction to it. For a full year, he said almost nothing. He didn't go on a late night apology tour. He didn't write a long emotional post on social media. He didn't go on The View to talk about his healing journey. He did what a real comedian does. He went into a room and he worked. He took that moment, probably the most discussed and analyzed 5 seconds of his entire life, and he processed it through the lens of stand-up. When he finally released his Netflix special, Selective Outrage, we saw the payoff. He took the trauma, the embarrassment, and the absurdity of that moment, and he turned it into a high-level social commentary. He used the stage to reclaim his narrative. In that special, you could see it. He was home, in his natural habitat. He was pacing, he was shouting, he was making the audience uncomfortable, and he was being funnier than he had been in a decade. It was a proof of concept. It showed that while a movie star can be destroyed by a single bad moment or a cancelled project, a real stand-up is invincible as long as they have a microphone and a room full of people.
Anybody that says words hurt has never been punched in the face.
Chris Rock is the reminder that you don't have to evolve out of comedy to be a legend. You don't have to grow up and start playing stoic fathers in prestige dramas to be taken seriously. He stayed true to the jazz of the stage. He realized that the most powerful thing you can be in this industry is a person who can stand in a room of 5,000 people and tell them the truth until they laugh. He is the outlier on our list, the one who refused to be Disneyfied, the one who refused to become a brand, and the one who kept his edge sharp in an industry that loves to dull everything it touches. But as we talk about these 4 men, Carrey, Sandler, Ferrell, and Rock, we have to acknowledge that they are all in some way children of the same sun. They all followed a path that was carved out by a man who was so brilliant, so frantic, and so deeply profoundly human that he changed the DNA of entertainment forever.
Now, I must ask you, this might be too personal, but
8 inches.
I've saved this final chapter for last on purpose. Throughout this video, we've looked at 4 titans: Carrey, Sandler, Ferrell, Rock, men who took the raw energy of the comedy circuit and used it to conquer the Hollywood machine. But this final individual is the archetype. He is the original blueprint from which all the others were stamped. I want to be very clear on this. Without Robin Williams, the career of a Jim Carrey or an Adam Sandler simply does not exist in the way we know it today. Robin was the first one to truly break the sound barrier between the funny guy and the serious actor. He was the one who proved to a cynical, elitist industry that a performer with a manic, improvisational spark of madness could also carry the emotional weight of a tragedy that would break your heart into 1,000 pieces. Just look at the trailer for the HBO documentary Come Inside My Mind. It's a beautiful, haunting piece of filmmaking that tries to capture the lightning-fast synapses of his brain. In it, there is a quote that I believe sums up the man better than any 10,000-word essay ever could. Stand-up is survival. For me, that's jazz. That's what I have to do. do. Think about that word, survival. For Robin, comedy wasn't a career choice or a way to get famous. It was an essential biological function, an exorcism. If he didn't get on that stage and let the jazz out, he would implode. And it was that very quality, that desperate, beautiful, frantic need to express everything at once that made him one of the most influential performers of the last 50 years. His journey began in the San Francisco stand-up scene of the 1970s, and the stories from that era are legendary. Most comedians have a set. They have 20 minutes of material that they've refined and polished until it's a finished product. Robin didn't have a set. He had a torrent. He would step onto a stage with no plan, no safety net, and simply allow the world around him to fuel a 3-hour improvisational explosion. He was so unique, so incredibly fast that other comedians, seasoned pros who had been in the business for decades, would literally stand in the wings of the club just to watch him. They were there to witness a phenomenon. It was like watching a master pianist play a concerto they were writing in real time. He was the jazz of comedy, and that improvisational muscle became the foundation of his cinematic power.
Everybody, shake from side to side. Come on now.
His breakout came in 1978 with Mork and Mindy. Now, in the context of television history, this is one of those precious moments. He landed the role of Mork the alien almost by accident after a single audition. The story goes that the producer asked him to take a seat and Robin immediately sat on his head. He didn't ask for permission, he just did it. And in that one moment of physical absurdity, the producer knew, this is it, this is the guy. Mork and Mindy turned him into a global superstar overnight, but it also threatened to trap him in the wacky alien box forever. For years, the industry saw him as the high-energy firecracker, a man who could do 100 voices a minute but couldn't be trusted with anything substantial. But Robin Williams was far more than a noisemaker. The first real bridge to his dramatic career came in 1987 with Good Morning Vietnam. This is the film where the Robin Williams persona truly met the dramatic actor. Director Barry Levinson did something incredibly smart. He just let the cameras roll. He gave Robin a microphone, put him in a booth, and told him to be the DJ. Most of the radio broadcasts in that film are pure, unadulterated Robin Williams improvisation. It is a masterclass in rhythm. But then the film pivots. We see the horror of the war through his eyes, and suddenly the fun is gone. We see a man realizing that his humor is a band-aid on a bullet wound. It earned him his first Oscar nomination, and the world finally started to realize, wait, there is something much deeper happening here. And that depth was fully realized in 1989 with Dead Poets Society. If you haven't seen this film in a while, go back and watch it. It is one of the most important films in my personal library. Robin plays John Keating, an English teacher at a rigid elite boarding school who teaches his students to carpe diem, seize the day. What makes this performance so masterful is the restraint. He isn't the manic firecracker here. He is gentle, he is wise, and he is deeply vulnerable. When the students stand on the desks and say, "Oh, Captain, my Captain,"
Captain, my Captain.
it's a moment of profound emotional resonance. He showed us that the spark of madness was about the passion for life. He used his comedic background to make Keating a teacher you actually wanted to listen to, but he used his dramatic soul to make him a man you were willing to stand on a desk for. But as the 90s arrived, Robin achieved something that no other comedian on this list has ever quite managed. He became the king of family entertainment while maintaining his edge. Take Aladdin. I don't think people realize how much Robin Williams fundamentally changed the world of animation. Before the genie, voice acting in animated films was usually done by specialized voice actors who stayed strictly to the script. Robin changed the rules. He went into the booth and recorded 16 hours of unused material. He riffed, he improvised, he did impressions of William F. Buckley and Arnold Schwarzenegger that made absolutely no sense in the context of ancient Agrabah, and Disney kept it all in. He turned the genie into a vessel for his own synapses, and in doing so, he made animated films cool for adults. Every celebrity voice performance you see today in a DreamWorks or Pixar film is a direct result of the genie. And then came Mrs. Doubtfire. At the first glance, Mrs. Doubtfire is a silly high-concept comedy about a guy who dresses up as a nanny to see his kids. In the hands of anyone else, it's a forgettable piece of 90s fluff. But Robin Williams turned it into a deeply moving exploration of divorce and the lengths a father will go to for his children. The scene in the kitchen where he's trying to cook and his breasts catch fire is legendary physical comedy. But the final monologue, where Mrs. Doubtfire talks to a child on the TV show about how families come in all different shapes and sizes, that is pure heartfelt sincerity. He could make you laugh until your ribs hurt, hurt, then pivot on a dime and make you realize the profound sadness of the situation. But for me, the peak of his career, the moment the spark of madness and the dramatic weight finally became one, was Good Will Hunting in 1997. Robin plays Sean Maguire, a therapist tasked with breaking through to Matt Damon's genius but broken Will Hunting. If you want to see a masterclass in stillness, watch the bench scene in the Boston Public Garden. It's a long, unbroken monologue where Robin explains to Will that he knows nothing about real life. He talks about war, he talks about loss, and he talks about the death of his wife. He isn't moving, he isn't doing voices, he isn't on. He is just there. He is a man who has lived, who has suffered, and who has found a quiet type of peace. It is one of the most powerful scenes in the history of cinema, and it was this role that finally earned him the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. It was a moment that felt overdue. The industry was finally, after all those years, admitting, we see you, we see the man behind the mask. And then 2014 happened. The passing of Robin Williams was one of those rare moments where the world felt like it actually stopped for a second. It wasn't just another celebrity death. It was the loss of a light that we all assumed would never go out. I remember the shock, the confusion, and the overwhelming outpouring of grief. People spontaneously created memorials at the Good Will Hunting bench in Boston, covering it in flowers and quotes. They stood outside the Mrs. Doubtfire house in San Francisco in silence. It was a stark reminder of the dual nature of the performer's mind. The same synapses that fired fast enough to create the jazz of comedy were the same ones that felt the weight of the world with an intensity that most of us can't imagine. His close friend Billy Crystal called him the brightest star in our comedy galaxy, and he was right, but stars that burn that bright often have a gravity that is hard to bear. I've spent this whole video talking about 5 different people, but I want to end by focusing on the legacy Robin Williams left behind. There are comedians who make you laugh, there are actors who make you cry, and then there was Robin Williams. The one man who could make you laugh and cry at the exact same time, without you even realizing the difference until it was already happening. He showed us that humor and heartbreak aren't two separate things, they are the same emotion just viewed from a different angle. He was the man who made it okay for the funny guy to be the most important person in the room. He paved the way for Jim Carrey to do Eternal Sunshine, for Adam Sandler to do Uncut Gems, and for Will Ferrell to do Stranger Than Fiction. He opened the door and then he stood in the doorway and held it open for everyone else. Robin Williams once said, "You're only given a little spark of madness, you mustn't lose it." He never lost his. Even in his darkest moments, he kept that spark alive for the rest of us. He used his madness to heal us, to entertain us, and to remind us what it means to be a human in a world that often feels like it's losing its soul. That's why he comes last in this video, because after Robin Williams, there truly is nothing left to say. He was the first, he was the best, and he remains the captain of every performer on this list. Take a look at these 5 individuals, 5 completely different paths, 5 different ways of interacting with the Hollywood machine, but they all share that one essential beginning, a live audience that couldn't be fooled. They all started in the trenches, they all survived the silence, and they all managed to keep that spark of madness through the years of fame and the layers of corporate slop. They proved that comedic instinct isn't just a gift, it's a superpower. It's the ability to find the truth in the absurd and the joy in the tragic. 5 people, 1 shared spark, and 1 man who showed them how to let it shine. But that's it for me today. Take care of yourselves, and remember, don't lose that spark. You're gonna need it. I'll see you guys in the next one.